Okay, hello everyone. Am I audible to you all?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Ma'am.
So, hello everyone on behalf of LitMania Literature Community. This is Himanshi Singh, and I hope you all are safe and working hard to achieve your desired goals. We have started this lecture series in order to help you all in understanding the basics of literature. Can you please, the ones whose mics are turned on, please can you switch it off? Please keep your mic off because it will be creating a kind of hindrance. Okay. Okay. So Litmania is a group of research scholars with an common goal, that is to share our episteme, and our basic aim is to teach and learn, which will be beneficial for you all. Let me introduce you to our speaker, Mr. Krishna Kumar. He's pursuing PhD from Mahatma Gandhi Central University. Krishna has also published a few articles and research papers in various journals. Today, giving a lecture on Matthew Arnold's study of poetry. It is the part of criticism. I hope you all know that criticism is very important and integral part of our UGC-NET examination. Often we see questions on criticism and on Matthew Arnold, which is very common nowadays, and they will be giving you references, they will be giving you passages from these essays, and you have to know very thoroughly these all these critiques, all these writers. Okay. Today, I hope that you all will learn so many new points, and you will get a motivation to strive hard to achieve more and more knowledge. And thank you, everyone. Now, I would like to hand over the mic to Krishna, and I welcome again Krishna. Thank you so much for joining us. Okay.
Himanshi, thank you so much for the warm welcome. So should I start? Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, you
No?
are
Yeah.
audible.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Good. So, good morning, my dear friends. Today, I'll be talking about basically, I'll be talking about Arnold's study of poetry. But in regard to that, we have to know about Victorian age and criticism. What was actually meant criticism in the age of in the Victorian age, and then I'll talk about Matthew Arnold and a study of poetry. In the study of poetry, he talks about basically four or five concepts that I'll be dealing in the essay, and then obviously Arnold talks about shortcomings of many poets like Chaucer, Burns, Dryden, Pope, etc. But there is also some shortcomings in Arnold as well. So even I'll be talking about that too. Then his achievements, and then I'll come to conclusion. So let me start with the criticism in the Victorian age. As you know, Victorian age in the Victorian age, lots of social and political transformation happened. Industrial revolution took place. Steam of engine was on high peak. Like steam of engines were used a lot. It came into existence, and people started using them. It was also due to science, due to development of science and technology. And then obviously Chartist movement also took place. And in the Victorian age, if we talk about criticism, like positivism was there, realism was there, naturalism was there, symbolism was there, aestheticism, under which art thought art's sake took place. Then heterological thinkers were there, and heterological thinkers like against the thinkers were against Hegel's philosophy, and also Marxism was also there. So in every age we try to analyze things from Marxist point of view. So in this age also, like people thought from the Marxist point of view as well. So the very first point, positivism. See, positivism was it was an ideology which emerged from mainstream bourgeois enlightenment ideals. Okay, and they rejected the Hegel's philosophy. And in Hegel's view, to see in Hegel's view, there were uh, yeah, there were two point of view that first that the positivism is essentially it was a conservative reaction to the changes occurring in the world, and it was emerged from positive thinkers like Durkheim, Auguste Comte, and Herbert Spencer, who wished to exclude from investigation all hypotheses that were empirically verifiable. Okay, and then if you talk about realism, realism influenced the creation of art and its criticism. People started, critiquing the real life situation in the even in their art also. And there was simplicity in style. Everything was very simple, like style, speech, or expression. It was not like just like before in the before in Elizabethan age that people used to talk about aristocrat people, and they everything was about everything was moving around the aristocrat people only. And we can see realism in Hardy and Macbeth Thackeray's work, George Eliot's work, and Dickens' work as well. And under realism, the umbrella term, people focused on contemporary issues and incidents. And then, if we talk about naturalism, it was simply a study of nature, or we can say it was the extreme form of realism. Okay, so people rejected the romanticism and all types of mysticism. Like people uh, stopped believing in gods. They started believing in facts. They were seeking facts only. Why? They started questioning, as it is also the one of the key term of Victorian age. Then Emily Zola's thought of observing human beings and their passion for nature. So, and then Emily Zola talks about, he says for naturalistic novels, people should talk about only human and their passions. Okay, and then if you talk about symbolism, again it was reaction to all the three above said things like naturalism, realism, or we can say French poetry. And Baudrillard and French Baudrillard found the French symbolism, and Simon introduced the British to symbolism in his work, The Symbolist Movement in Literature. It is a work written by Simon in which he talks about symbolism in the British to the British people. Okay, then of course aesthetism, it is for art's sake. Like people started believing in art for art.
Hello,
Hello.
hello. Good
Yeah,
morning, sir. Sir, how much we have covered yet?
this is the first slide only.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And then if we talk about heterological thinkers, they were against Hegel's philosophy. Okay, and if we say Hegel's philosophy was the embodiment of bourgeois principles, and Schopenhauer initiated this tradition, which critiques, Enlightenment notions of the scientific progress of civilization and the perfectibility of the individual and the state through regions. People again started believing in regions, as I said. And if we talk about Marxism, in this umbrella term, we can say, uh, you know, okay, sorry. So in Marxism, Marx viewed history not as the working of a divine spirit, but rather as the product of human labor. People started talking about the product of human labor. What? how human labor was associating and helping in the capital of the society, you know. And let me come to the next slide. I'll take the questions in the end. Okay, so you may note down your questions. Let us talk about Matthew Arnold. As we know, Matthew Arnold is a poet turned critic. First, he was the poet, and then he turned into critic. And all this study of poetry, it took Arnold got some authority to talk about the talk about the criticism when he became the professor of poetry at Oxford University. Okay, he was inspired from his father, Dr. Thomas. I don't know it was a real doctor or just his name was Dr. Thomas. And he was also inspired from the age in which he lived, and he also read Homer, Sophocles, Virgil, Aristotle, and many others, which reflected in his works. He was basically interested in reading Greeks, okay, and ancient writers, okay. And he also criticized the bourgeois' narrow mercantile concerns and their obsession with utilitarianism and reason, and rejected the growing scientific temper and positivism of this. He said, see, he said that people all are talking about utilitarianism or reason or reason. He said all these things are nothing. Just they should enjoy. They should enjoy the age or they should enjoy the age and he should think critically. Okay, all these people are like people are only people are only associated with those things who which was in their utility. Okay, then if we talk about his writings were divided into three periods. The first period was literary criticism, and then the second period was socio-ethical. Even literary criticism was divided into 2 parts. First, theoretical criticism. Second, practical criticism. And if we talk about theoretical criticism, his first page talks about the theoretical criticism, in which he wrote the preface to poems, in which he talks about why did he turn to prose writing from poetry writing. Sorry. Then, in the first page, he also written on translating human, then essays in criticism, the first series, and on the study of Celtic literature. And in the second page, which is kind of practical criticism, that is culture and anarchy, then Saint Paul and Protestantism, then literature and dogma, then God and the Bible, and in the third page, it is again the second series of essays in criticism, which came into existence in 1888. And then Arnold, in all the above writings, he critiqued and commented on religion, education, culture, and social issues. And all his central concerns was the problem of living fulfilled lives in an industrial society. Like he was totally talking about the current age, whatever was happening in the society. Okay, and then he was influenced by J.H. Newman and Thomas Carlyle at Oxford University. They were there at Oxford University, J.H. Newman and Thomas Carlyle. Okay, and then after he greatly influenced T.S. Eliot and F.R. Lewis in the 20th century. Both these writers were inspired from Matthew Arnold from his works. Okay, so let me come to the next slide. Now. I'll start the poetry. I'll start the essay, a study of poetry, which was written in 1851. So this poetry first published as an introduction to the edition of the English poets brought by T.H. Ward. He was the editor of the book, the English poets. And then the most influential texts of literary humanism, then it is the most influential texts of literary humanism. It is an essay about judgment and evaluation, like Arnold judged, Arnold judged the rest of the writers, and he compares Dryden, Pope, Milton, or Shakespeare, all these things. He will talk about all these writers, and he will be telling about which one is a classical writer, which one is not a classical writer, what is the characteristics of classical writer. Also, he shows an elevated status for poetry over science, religion, theology, and philosophy. He said, poetry is above all, above everything, whether it is science or religion or theology or philosophy. Okay, so we can divide this essay into two parts, and in the first part, he talks about nature and function of poetry. Basically, he talks about the theory of poetry. What should be the theory of poetry? Then he talks about and then he gives the reference from the different authors. For example, he talks about poetry as a criticism of life. Now, what is the meaning of? I'll be talking about what is the meaning of criticism life. What does he mean by when he say criticism of life? Then he talks about Charlantism, like differentiation between true and false, sound and unsound, higher and lower. And then he talks about two types of fallacies, which are historical fallacy and personal fallacy. And he talks about three types of estimates as well, in which like historical estimate is there, real estimate is there, and personal estimate is there. Then he talks about touchstone method, uh, in the touchstone method, he basically talks about how you can judge a poetry whether it is good or not. Sorry,
सेंट्रल
is someone
यूनिवर्सिटी
saying?
है वो यहाँ से किया हुआ है सेंट्रल यूनिवर्सिटी ऑफ हरियाणा से एमए किया हुआ है और हाँ
Please turn off, please
Shruti,
turn off the
Shruti,
mic.
please turn off your mic. Shruti, am I audible to you?
Yeah, I think we are good now. Should I start?
Please, everybody,
Hello?
turn your mics off, please. Yeah, Krishna, you
Yeah,
continue.
yeah. So in the I was talking about in the touchstone method, he talks about how you can judge anyone's poetry, whether it is a good poetry or it is not high standard poetry. Uh, then he gives reference from Chaucer, then Age of Dryden, and Thomas Gray, then Burns. And he avoids talking about romantic poets like Byron, Shelley, or Keats because he thinks that if he talks about those writers like romantic writers, somewhere personal estimate will bother him, and it will become fallacious. And the essay particularly deals with Arnold's view on classical English poets and poetry and the most appropriate and effective way to critique and criticism, how we should critique a poem, or you can say prose, whatever it is. You know. Then he gives the concepts of the best kind of poetry. What is the best kind of poetry? What is the qualities of the best kind of poetry and how we should recognize the same. Okay, so let me start the story, the essay. So the first part, the nature and function of poetry. In this, he talks of poetry as a criticism of life. He says that I didn't mention uh, the whole quotation, but I would like to read it. He says the future of poetry is immense because in poetry, where it is worthy of its high destiny, our age, our race, as times goes on, will find an ever surer and surer stay. See, here he says that future of poetry is immense. Like poetry is as bright uh, uh, as nothing else is as bright as poetry because science, religion, philosophy, or you can say politics seeds the seed the facts and creates confusion between which is good and bad and fake and harmful. Like which is fake and see in science we basically talk about facts. But how will we judge what is fact? Who will judge this is the fact, this is true fact, this is false fact, right? And in this thing, he says poetry deals with the ideas which are closely related to human nature and hence more appealing to mankind. Even science will be incomplete without poetry, as Wordsworth calls poetry the impassioned expression, which is the face of all sciences. Now, what do you mean by impassioned expression? Can anyone explain? What do you understand by Wordsworth this term, impassioned expression? Okay, no one. Okay, let me explain. See, when what we say the impassioned expression, it directs to the definition of poetry, right? What is the definition of poetry? What's the definition of poetry? Anyone? Quick, am I audible?
Sorry, sir, please repeat it.
Sorry, come again.
Please repeat your question, sir.
What is the definition of poetry according to Wordsworth?
Poetry is the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings, the collected
Yes,
in
good.
tranquility.
Yes, good. Thank you so much. See now, poetry is the spontaneous overflow of powerful feeling. What is a spontaneous overflow? This impassioned expression, it is the opposite of the same term is the a spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings. For example, he says poetry, Wordsworth says that whatever expression it comes from our core, right? Our core feelings in our from within ourselves, right? And which is the face of all sciences. For example, whatever you talk about, if your expression is not spontaneous, how will you describe yourself? For example, when the apple fall from a tree, at that time Newton say the Newton's spontaneous flow was why the apple down on the earth? Why did he go to the upside, right? So that is why he says the future of poetry is immense, right? And then next is someone's mic. I think someone's mic is on. Please turn off your mic. Yes. Now, the second definition second quotation I would like to explain is since poetry to be capable of fulfilling such high destiny must be poetry of a higher order of excellence. See, he says if we are expecting that poetry is this much of high destiny, it is above of all sciences, then it must be something of high order of excellence. Okay, there is no charlatanism. Charlatanism again, the term, the comparison between excellent and inferior, sound and unsound, or you may say half sound, and true and untrue, or you may say only half true. Okay, because if it will be there in poetry, then there will be confusion. Okay, and if you are expecting poetry to be of this high order, there should be no confusion at all, right? And the next, the next quotation I'd like to explain is poetry as criticism of life. Okay, let me find the quotation. Okay, yes. Arnold says in poetry as a criticism of life under the conditions fixed for such a criticism by the laws of poetic truth and poetic beauty, the spirit of our race will find, and we have said, as time goes on and as other helps fail, its consolation and stay. Here, if we talk about criticism of life, what do you mean? What does he mean by criticism of life? See, this term criticism of life has been explained by a number of critics. Like I have mentioned two critics. First is Professor Garrod. He says criticism of the chaos of life. He says criticism of life means criticism of the chaos of life. That means we are talking about our life only. life, whether it is good, whether it is bad, what is going on in our life. That is just criticism of life. Like whatever is going on, Arnold gave it term a criticism. Criticism. Okay. Then he talks about Oliver Elton, and he says, criticism of life means poetry clarifies while it delights. That means he says that whenever you feel delightful, it will clarify you that what does it mean, what a poetry mean, what a particular line means. Okay. For example, if you are saying something in poetry, but people are not able to understand clearly. Okay. So how will it serve its purpose? Then he says poetic truth. From the term poetic truth, he means the matter and the substance of poetry. The matter of substance of poetry should be true from our real life experience. Okay, we may say it is a true depiction of life without falsifying facts. That means whatever you are writing, just talk about the reality. Don't falsify the fact. Don't change the facts. Okay, whatever is going on within you, you may write. For example, these days you must have listened so many poets. Okay, so many poetry are coming. Poetry is coming on YouTube channels. Like people are talking about their true sense. If you see, there is a poetic truth in their poetry. Whatever poetries are coming these days on YouTube, like people have started basically writing poetry. Like for example, you may say like if there is Kumar Biswas, or you may say Aranya Johar, the present. Then you say like many poets have come in the 21st century, like within this 4 5 years. Okay. Then he talks about poetic beauty. What does he mean by poetic beauty? He means the manner and the style, the diction you have used in your poetry. Okay, there should be fluidity of diction, and liquidity of diction and words. Okay, as it springs from right words in the right order. See, fluidity comes from your right order. If you have right words, but you have not put it into right order, then again it will be useless. Okay, there will be no benefit of it. You won't feel the charm, the seriousness of poetry. What does it mean, right? So let me come to the next slide. Then, obviously, I have told you that we talk about two types of fallacy. The first is historical fallacy, and second is personal fallacy. See, in the historical fallacy, people when there will be historical fallacy in you, you will be talking about from historical point of view. Okay, and you'll be judging poetry from history, from historical writers or authors or thoughts, or whatever you say, or whatever is going on in the history. Okay. Then he talks about personal fallacy, which is based on flawed personal estimation of the poet. Or see, in personal fallacy, again, you will talk about from your personal likes and dislikes. Okay, you won't understand. If you talk about from your personal likes and dislikes, then you will not be able to judge poetry for its true meaning, right? Like there will be some partiality, right? For example, if you like something, some people may not like that particular thing. Okay. And this personal fallacy generally occurs with the contemporary, or you may say modern poet. And uh, uh, we may read the author's Arnold's particular quotation. He says that, but the real estimate, the only true one, is liable to supersede it if we are not watchful by two other kind of estimates, the historic and the personal estimates, both of which are fallacious. So Arnold says historical and personal fallacy, all will not serve in the judgment of poetry. Okay. Then he talks about estimate, the real estimate. See, in real estimate, Arnold says that people should keep in mind the great writer's line in their mind, okay, or you may say the incident, okay, that will serve the purpose, okay. So and you may, and he says that that line can be applied as a touchstone method to judge a particular poetry, okay. And he says that if you talk about real estimate, then you must avoid historical and personal estimate. See, historical estimate and personal estimate again. This is this is same as historical fallacy and personal fallacy. Okay, so like in historical estimate, what happens? We talk about ancient poets and his qualities, okay, his course of nations of language, thought, and poetry. Like how does he think? How does he put his language in his poetry? What is his thinking? What is his style of writing poetry? And in personal estimate, we calculate personal estimate calculates poets' merit on the basis of personal likings or affinities. As I said, in personal fallacy, you will talk about from your point of view, not everyone's point of view. Okay, and obviously, as I said, it makes people biased towards their contemporary poets in the personal estimate. So this was, two types of fallacies and three types of estimates. This is the one of the main argument in the study of poetry. Then he talks about the touchstone method. He says, let me read the quotation. Indeed, there can be no more useful help for discovering what poetry belongs to the class of the truly excellent and can therefore do us much good than to have always in one's mind lines and expression of the great masters and to apply them as a touchstone to other poetry. As I said, again, as I said in the in the real estimate, Arnold says that you should keep in your mind the great authors single lines, or you may say some incidents that he had talked about. Okay, so what is actually touchstone method? See, this is a kind of prism. When we cross light through prism, it scatters into seven, in seven colors. In the same way, your work will be judged from the lens of works written by Shakespeare, Homer, Dante, Milton, whatever it is. Okay, so he's basically saying that you should go to the ancients who has already written great epics, or say great works, and then you should judge your work from their works written. Okay. So Arnold, to prove his touchstone method, he gives the example of French poetry of 12th and 13th century. Uh, Here he talks about two terms, langue d'oil, that means langue d'oil, he means the poetry of the northern France, and sorry, modern France, and second, langue d'oil, the poetry of the southern France. See, the poetry of northern France influenced Italian literature, and the poetry of southern France influenced British literature. Okay, and and the language of these poetry, modern French poetry and the southern French poetry, influenced Italian literature, and which was the first literature of modern Europe. Okay, modern Europe first literature. Italian literature was the modern Europe first literature. Okay, and in 14th century, then Chaucer reversed the situation. Now Chaucer came in the 14th century, and he reversed the situation. His style, manner, his use of words, his rhyme, his meter, and stanza completely overshadowed French poetry. Okay, like people then started admiring Chaucer's work instead of French literature, whether it is northern literature, northern French literature, or southern French literature. Okay, so I'm coming to the next slide. Now this is the second part of poetry, and where he gives references of different poets. Now he says These few lines, if we have tact and can use them, are enough even of themselves to keep clear and sound or judgment about poetry, to save us from fallacious estimates of it, to conduct us to a real estimate. See, now he says what is real estimate, and he here he gives some examples from different poets. Through these lines, he talks about the poetic diction, how a poetic diction should be, okay, and poetic truth. For example, he says, "In His will is our peace." The first quotation is, "In His will is our peace." See, there is no need to explain these lines, okay. The poet is saying that whatever he wants, that the peace is there in that itself, okay. फॉर एग्जाम्पल समटाइम्स वी से लाइक जो भी करना है आप कर लो, मुझे कोई दिक्कत नहीं है, आई एम एग्री विद दैट, लाइक जब हम बहुत ज्यादा फ्रस्ट्रेटेड हो जाते हैं, राइट. Then he gives the second quotation is that, "If thou didst ever hold me in thy heart, absent thee from felicity while, and in this harsh world draw thy breath in pain to tell my story." This is the line, this is the line when this was the line Hamlet said when he was dying, and sorry, it was a request to Horatio. Then he gives the lines of Milton, like, "Encourage never to submit or yield, and what is else not to be overcome." In these lines, he says that if you are courageous, then you can overcome everything. Okay. The next one is, "Which cost Ceres all that pain to seek her through the world." Again, these all are the poetic. He talks about poetic diction in these lines. Like everything is, these lines are self-explanatory. For example, if we take example from Guljar's poetry, his even two-liners are really great in poetic diction and poetic truth. Okay, because in Guljar's lines you will feel whatever he's saying. His every words matter a lot. Okay, for example, if you say, this is not Guljar's line, but somewhere I have read it. It is said that वो किताबों में दर्ज था ही नहीं, सिखाया जो सबक जिंदगी में. तो ये see, this is line, वो किताबों में दर्ज था ही नहीं, सबक जो सिखाया सबक जिंदगी में. So there is no need to explain these lines. Okay, poetic diction is very much fine here. People can understand what is the meaning of these lines. Okay. Then he says the superior character of truth and seriousness in the matter and substance of the best poetry is inseparable from the superiority of diction and movement, marking its style and manner. See, whatever I have talked about in the same line, Arnold says that the best poetry contains the higher truth and higher seriousness, along with the fluidity and liquidity of diction and movement, which are marking in its style and manner. Okay, so let us come to Chaucer. Now this is the second part, and Arnold gives some examples from Chaucer. What is a classic poet? And he says Chaucer has not their helplessness. He has gained the power to survey the world from a central, a truly human point of view. We have only to call to mind the prologue to the Canterbury Tales. See, in the Canterbury Tales, there are so many tales in which we can find that poetic truth is there in Chaucer's tale. Like if you talk about the Sumner's tale, the Sumner is basically the guy who lives in court and who calls the people for the judgment, the judgment of the particular incident. And the Sumner used to take money from people. Okay, then Pardoner again, the father of the church, corrupt the corrupt father. He used to take money to provide pardon from God. He used to say, if you will give money, I'll take you to God and request Him to pardon you. Okay. Then the knight's tale is there, the monk's tale is there, the bride's tale is there. If you read all these tales, you will find the poetic truth is there in Chaucer's poetry. But although he says that, and yet I say Chaucer is not one of the great classics. He says that Chaucer is not one of the great classics. Why? Because the substance of Chaucer's poetry, his view of things and his criticism of life, has largeness, freedom, shrewdness, benignity, but it has not the high seriousness. Arnold said there is no high seriousness in Chaucer. And what is this high seriousness? I don't know. And even Arnold never explained it. What is this high seriousness? Whether it is the truthfulness of life, the true incident of life. And this is one of the shortcomings of Arnold, that he says high seriousness, but what is this high seriousness? He never explained it. Okay. Then he says Homer's criticism of life has now. See, he never explained it, but he has given the reference of Homer's criticism of life. Homer's poetry, that yes, Homer's poetry has high seriousness. Dante's poetry has high seriousness. Shakespeare's poetry has high seriousness. Okay. Then he talks about on the age of Dryden. He talks about Dryden. He says we are to regard Dryden as the prescient and glorious founder, and Pope as the splendid high priest of our age of prose and reason. He says that Dryden and Pope are the great classics of prose and reason, but not poetry. Okay, and he says of our excellent and indispensable 18th century. He's the he says Dryden and Pope um, is the classic prose writers, not poetry writers. Okay. Then he says for the purposes of their mission and destiny, their poetry, like their prose, is admirable. Then he says. Arnold says if we talk about Dryden, he has served his purpose. He has served his purpose. Like he talks about. He says that there is poetic truth in Dryden, but again there is no high seriousness. Then he says, though they may write in verse, though they may, in a certain sense, be masters of the art of versification, Dryden and Pope are not classics of our poetry. They are classics of our prose. Again, he says they are classics of our prose because there is everything in their prose what a good prose takes, but not in poetry. See, in his poetry, poetic truth is there, but again, poetic diction is not there, according to Arnold. In according to Arnold, in Dryden's poetry, poetic truth is there, but poetic diction is not there. Okay, his liquidity of diction is not there. Okay, and if you see poetic truth, that means he is true to life. He is taking inspiration from incidents happening in our life. But to explain the same, his poetic diction is not that much of classics as Dante's or Shakespeare's or Homer's has it. Now let us come to the next. Then he talks about Thomas Gray. In Thomas Gray, he says he's the scantiest and frailest of classics in our poetry, but he is a classic. Okay. He says, although there is some lackness in Thomas Gray's poetry, but he is the classic. Why? Because there is poetic truth and poetic diction in his poetry. For example, if you have read the LG written in Country Churchyard, it is very wonderful. You should see, if you put it from if you see it from poetic truth and poetic diction point of view, like this is the best poetry of Thomas Gray, the LG written in Country Churchyard, in Country Churchyard, and uh, why Arnold says that Thomas Gray is a great classic. He says because he says that he never spoke out in poetry. He says that he never spoke out in poetry. Whatever he has written, it was his spontaneous overflow of feeling. Okay, poetic whether it is poetic truth or poetic diction. Okay, Through these four words, he says like it contained the whole history of Gray, both as a man and the poet. He never spoke in poetry. Like he just he has been true to life as well as his as well as the age, which has been shown in his writing. And then Arnold says, compare not with the work of the great masters of the golden ages of poetry, but with the poetry of his own contemporaries in general. Gray may be said to have reached in his style and the excellence at his aim. See, he says that if you see Gray's contemporary, he can be considered as a classic, a good classic. Okay. Then he talks about Burns. He says that the real Burns is of course in his Scottish poem. Let us boldly say that of much of this poetry, a poetry dealing perpetually the Scottish drink, Scottish religion, and Scottish manners, a Scottish man's estimate is apt to be personal. Through these lines, Arnold says that Byrne is also true to his life. There is poetic truth in his writing, but again, there is no poetic diction, and there is no high seriousness in his writing. That is why he says, no, Burns, like Chaucer, comes short of the high seriousness, as I said. Again, Arnold says that Chaucer, there is lack of high seriousness in Chaucer's poetry. In the same way, there is a lack of high seriousness in Burns' poetry as well. And the virtue of matter and manner, which goes with the high seriousness, is waiting to his work. He says there is a lack of high seriousness in Burns' poetry. Okay. So this was the thought of Arnold's thought on Gray, on Byrne, on Age of Trident, or on you may say on yes, I forgot to mention romantic writers. Okay, he didn't talk about Byron, Shelley, Keats. He says that I can't comment on them because I might be personal because they are my contemporaries. Okay, so let us come to the next slide. Now, if we talk about Arnold's, shortcomings, okay, what is their shortcomings? See, this whatever I have mentioned in shortcomings and achievements, these are not my words. These are all mentioned in the Principle of Literary Criticism, written by Dr. Raghukul Tilak. Okay, he says Raghukul Tilak says that there is a certain want of logic and method in Arnold's criticism. Okay, he is not a scientific critic. Often he is vague and fails to define or state clearly his views. As I said, Arnold says there should be high seriousness, but he never explained what is high seriousness. He never explained what is what is criticism of life. What does he mean by criticism of life? Like people have considered it as he talks about the poetry as the ideas to life, according to Arnold. Okay. Then he says then the next shortcoming is that pure criticism with him has no meaning and significance. Tilak says that there is not pure literary criticism in Arnold's writing. His criticism is lacking in originality. There is no originality in Arnold's writing. Then he says, practically all his critical concepts are borrowed from Aristotle, or you may say Longinus, or you may say ancient writers. For example, he says he his action and high seriousness has been taken from Aristotle, and his concept of grand style has been taken from Longinus. Okay, then you see again the next shortcoming. Raghukul Tilak says that his learning is neither exact nor precise. His illustration of his touchstone method are all misquotations. See, Tilak says that even touchstone method is not clear. It is, it is somewhere there is some confusion. Okay. Then he says he speaks of effect of poetry of its high seriousness, but never its pleasure, the aesthetic pleasure which a poem must impart, and which is the true taste of its excellence. The Tilak says that although he talks about high seriousness, but what about aesthetic pleasure? For example, as I have read some quotations that he has given example in his essay. Like some quotations were, not that much understandable. We have to read deeply the age, the author, and then we will able to understand what actually the particular author is saying. That is where maybe Tilak is saying that even Touchstone Method is like in misquotation. Okay. Then, if we talk about Arnold's achievement, obviously he is comparable to Aristotle. He has a reputation like Aristotle. People used to admire him like Aristotle. Okay, and he is comparable because Tilak says that Aristotle shows us the critique in relation to art, and Arnold shows us critique in relation to the public. Aristotle dissects the work of art, and Arnold dissects a critique. Okay, I mean Tilak is saying that where Aristotle is talking about if we say if we talk about example if we take example of poetry, Aristotle shows us what is best poetry. Okay, and Arnold teaches us how we should judge the best poetry. We do understand that. Then Tilak says he raised criticism to a much higher level by waging a relentless battle against the intrusion of personal, literary, or religious prejudice. Like he says poetry has immense future. Immense future, that means he keeps poetry all over science, theology, philosophy, religion, everything. He has put poetry above all of above all of them, and he took criticism at that point of level that even people believed him that yes, poetry is above all, right? Okay, so this was it. Like I have talked about Arnold. In conclusion, like in concluding thought, I would like to end my lecture from his quotation and his quotations itself, like poetry a criticism of life under the condition fixed for such a criticism by the laws of poetic truth and poetic diction. He again says yes, like I have explained it already. So in this in today's lecture, I have talked about Arnold and his age, then his his three types of estimates: real estimate, personal estimate, historical estimate. Then two types of fallacy: historical fallacy, personal fallacy. Then I have talked about Chaucer, Burns, Gray, uh, and Byron, Selleck, like whatever he have given examples from that. Okay. So this was my concluding thoughts, and I have taken reference from his poem itself, like uh, History of English Literature, William J. Long, then Uma Viswas, Matthew Arnold's Study of Poetry, then Dr. Jyotsna Pathak's essay that is published on EPG Pathsala, his like study of poetry, literature in the Victorian age, and Vinita Gupta's Matthew Arnold as a cultural critic. Thank you so much. So, any question? We have 3 minutes. Yes. Any question? Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay, thank you. So, if you have question, you can ask me or you may write to my email.
Okay, thank you so much, Krishna, for such an insightful lecture. And I hope you all learned a lot from today's lecture. You have gathered so many new points, and these points are going to help you for sure in your exams. Thank you so much, everyone. Now, I would like to call upon Shahrukh. for giving the insights on this lecture and for winding up the session. I guess, Krishna, there is a question for you. Let
Yeah,
me
yes,
read it for you.
yes, please.
Just a second. Sir, can his three estimate can be called as precursor of deconstruction?
Precaution of deconstruction. Uh, yes, you may say it as in the deconstruction. Again, this is the concept like where we try to talk about uh, what actually is the meaning of particular thing. Okay, like particular lines. I don't say deconstruction like Rolla Barthes. I think Rolla Barthes has talked about it, right? So in this regard, if we talk about Arnold, if we try to judge this poetry from deconstructionist point of view, again, yes, because he says like historical estimate will be there, real estimate will be there, and personal estimate will be there. So if we say like Arnold also talks about real estimate, okay, and in that regard, Arnold is saying that you should not be partial from any point of view. In the same way, if we talk about deconstruction, this is the same thing, right? That again, you have to deconstruct it. You have to consider that the particular line is open to discuss from any point of view. Okay, there should be no partiality, not like the author who has written, not it should be judged from that point of view that from which age the from which age this particular line has been appeared, from that what was the biographical incidents of the author who has written it. This should be not there while you are judging particular line. Okay, so you may say yes. Yeah, Sonali, am I clear? Okay, good. Yes. Any question next? Okay, I think there is no question. Yes. Uh, Manshi, you may go ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much, Krishna, for joining us today. Now, I would like to call upon Shahrukh to share his insights on the topic and he'll wind up the session. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Thank you,
sir.
Krishna, for your insightful lecture. Can you please go on to that slide where Sonali was talking about the three estimates? Yes.
Yeah, yeah, sure.
Hmm.
Yes, this is the slide.
So she's talking about this historical fallacy, personal fallacy, real estimate.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah. She basically talks about real estimate. Okay.
Okay. So I hope
Mm.
Priya has already answered her question. Great. So yes, so Krishna was initially talking about the Hegel, the philosophy of Hegel, and then he also talked about symbolism. So all these things are very important and interrelated. See, that's how history actually progresses. And that is also one of the concepts given by Hegel when he's talking about dialect. We all know that he is very famous for the concept of dialect, where he's talking about thesis and then antithesis and then synthesis. Thesis and antithesis are kind of combined in order to form the synthesis. So this is how history actually progresses, and this concept has been also borrowed by W.B. Yeats when he is talking about the second coming and all his poetry. He is talking about that concept of gyre. So that concept of gyre actually says that there is a kind of conical structure, and the tip of the cone is actually the end of the history. and the larger part of the cone is actually from where history actually begins. So history begins from this larger part, and at the tip of the means cone, the history ends. Then again from that tip, there is a means upside down kind of cone will be presented. Okay, so the end of one particular age actually leads to the beginning of the another age. So that's how actually this concept of history progresses. So these are very complex ideas, but I hope you have understood this. And then he was also talking about Krishna talked about symbolism. So yeah, the French poet Charles Baudrillard, Baudrillard is associated with postmodernism. So Charles Baudelaire talks about this. Means his poetry conveys the ideas of symbolism, which has been later on adapted by the French authors like Stephen Mallarmé and Paul Valéry and other authors of that time. And later on, we can see that Arthur Simon wrote this manifesto of symbolist poetry. So that's how it comes to the English stage, a kind of means symbolism in the poetry of the English or British authors. And then he's also means T.S. Eliot. We all know that T.S. Eliot is very much indebted to this Arnold's objectivism, so to say, because in what was the condition before Victorian age? There was this era of romanticism where they are very much subjective. All the things that they talk about are very much subjective, whether it is criticism or poetry. Now, Matthew Arnold gave us the concept of objectivism, where that is the reason why T.S. Eliot praised Arnold's objective approach to critical evaluation, particularly his tools of comparison and analysis. And you know, Alan Tate, when he's in his essay Tension in Poetry, he actually imitates Arnold's Touchstone Method to discover tension or the proper balance between connotation and denotation in poetry. So see how everything is interrelated. But then when we talk about deconstruction now, in deconstruction, Derrida has gone too far. So he is actually the main proponent of post-structuralism. At the same time, he came up with this idea of deconstruction, and his disciples like Paul D. Mann, J.S. Miller, they were following, they were the follower of Derrida. So he has taken the theory and criticism to another level. So we can interrelate, like I have said that T.S. Eliot has borrowed the term or the concept of objectivism from Matthew Arnold. Then later on, Alan Tate also borrowed this concept of objectivism or Touchstone method and applied in his work Tension in Poetry. So history and the philosophy progresses like this. So that is the reason why that great philosopher, Wittgenstein, he says that philosophy is a kind of bewitchment of language. What we do actually is that we put a line or sentence out of a context, and then we make a new philosophy altogether. So if you will extract out a particular sentence from whole book, that will means and then you will interpret it out of the context, then yes, there will be the beginning of one theory or one criticism which is completely new. So context is very important. That is also true with this language game. Context is very important while we are talking about this language game, while we are talking about the theory of understanding, theory of truth. So context matters a lot. But when you will remove the context and just extract out a sentence out of the context and try to make a new philosophy, this can be a beginning of a new theory and new philosophy. But then what you are doing, you are actually trying to prove that your precursor is inferior to you by putting out that sentence out of the context. So that's how actually this whole idea of history, philosophy, and then criticism progresses, and it is still in fluidity. So with that, I would like to wind up this session, and means I have already told what are the thoughts I have had during this lecture that I have listened right now. So thank you so much, Krishna. Thank you so much, Himanshi. Now you can close up the session.
Yes, thank you, Saroj.
Thank you, everyone. I would like to thank Krishna for joining us today and for sharing this insightful lecture. Thank you, Priya, for answering the question. Thank you, Shahrukh, for winding up the session. Thank you, Mahin. And thank you, Shahrukh Rahman, for everybody. And thanks, everyone, for joining us today. I
Yes,
hope it helped you a lot and it will help you in the coming up in the future. And we will come up with new lectures. You can give us suggestions